My name is Loretta James. I am 57 years old, and I have worked most of my life as a school secretary in Atlanta. I have never been wealthy, but I have always been steady. People in my neighborhood know me for my discipline, my smile, and the way I kept my front porch neat with 2 rocking chairs, waiting for company. That evening, I did not expect humiliation. It was a family dinner, one of those gatherings where cousins bring their casseroles, and the house fills with laughter before the food even hits the table. I had been invited by my daughter, or at least I thought I had. When I walked into her home, I noticed the long table set in the dining room. Turkey collard greens, cornbread sweet potatoes. The kind of meal that makes you remember your childhood. But what caught my eyes was not the food. It was the way every chair was filled except one. An empty chair at the very end clearly meant for me. I smiled politely, trying to ignore the tension in my daughter's eyes. She is 32, ambitious, with a sharp tongue she must have inherited from me. But when she looked at me, there was no warmth, only distance. "Mom," she said, her voice cool enough to silence the room. "You don't need to sit with us tonight. You're too old for this table." The words landed harder than any slap. Too old to share a meal with my own blood. My hand tightened around the handle of the ceramic mug I had brought with me, a mug I've used for 20 years. The rim is chipped, but it still holds coffee fine. Just like me, a little worn, but never broken. Laughter died. Forks froze in midair. My cousin cleared his throat, trying to change the subject, but the silence pressed heavier than the summer humidity outside. I wanted to defend myself, to ask why, to remind her of nights I worked double shifts to pay her school fees. But my throat felt locked. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady, yet loud, as if the whole house could hear it too. I looked at that empty chair, the one waiting for me, and realized it was not meant as a seat of honor. It was a seat of pity, a reminder that I was no longer wanted in the circle I built with my own sweat. I did not sit down. I set my mug carefully on the counter so it would not break. I looked at my daughter, and though my voice shook, I managed to speak. One day I said, "You will understand what it means to be left out." For a moment our eyes met. She looked away first. I stepped back, turned, and walked out of that house. Every step echoed like a nail sealing a door shut. Behind me, the laughter did not return. It stayed silent, heavy, as if even the walls knew a boundary had been crossed. Outside, the night air was thick but freeing. My heart was bruised but not shattered. As I reached my car, I gripped the chipped mug again. The thought crossed my mind. They may try to erase me, but truth leaves its own mark. That was the night I promised myself I would not fight with anger. I would fight with truth. And this was only the beginning. I said it to myself that night, standing under the streetlight outside my daughter's home. I would not fight with anger. I would fight with truth. Those words echoed inside me as I sat in my car, gripping the chipped ceramic mug on the passenger seat. Truth. It was all I had ever carried, and it was all I would need now. The drive back to my small brick house was quiet. No radio, no chatter, only the hum of the tires and the sound of my breath. Every red light felt like a pause, a chance to remember who I had been before this hurt. Because if I was going to survive what came next, I needed to remember. I was not always the woman my daughter dismissed. Once I was the young mother who woke up before dawn in the South, ironing her uniform for the school office, packing her little girl's lunch, and walking her to the bus stop before heading to work. I remember those mornings in the sticky Georgia heat, my dress clinging to my back as I walked the cracked sidewalks. I remember whispering promises to myself that my child would never feel less than anyone else. The truth is, I sacrificed everything to make that promise real. There was the second job, the one nobody saw. After spending the day answering phones and filing papers at the elementary school, I would hurry across town to clean offices. I carried a bucket, gloves, and rags, scrubbing floors that would be dirty again the next morning. My hands cracked from bleach, but I didn't care. Every dollar was for her tuition, her books, her future. And when weekends came, I baked. Sweet potato pies, pound cakes, trays of cornbread. I sold them outside church parking lots, at neighborhood block parties. Anywhere someone was hungry. People laughed, sometimes called me the pie lady, but those pies paid for field trips and new shoes. There was even a night I will never forget. My daughter must have been around 12. A storm had knocked out the power, the house dark, except for one candle. She was crying because homework was due the next day, and she couldn't see to finish it. I held the candle steady while she wrote, my hand burning from the dripping wax. I told her, baby, don't worry. Darkness doesn't last forever. You just keep writing. She smiled through her tears, and I thought that smile would carry me through anything. That was the truth of my motherhood: candlelight, sweat, and silence. No one cheered for me. No one clapped when I came home at midnight. But I believed my sacrifices would speak one day in her success, in her kindness. Yet the years passed, and I noticed changes. She grew taller, sharper, restless. She didn't want me walking her to the bus stop anymore. Mama, you too old-fashioned, she said once, brushing my hand away. It stung, but I told myself it was teenage pride, nothing more. Still, the distance grew. At her high school graduation, she barely looked at me as she hugged her friends. I sat in the bleachers with my chipped mug of coffee, clapping until my palms burned. She never introduced me to her teachers. Later, I learned she told them her mother was busy working, as if my presence embarrassed her. Mini-climax moments cut through my memory like glass. The first time she asked me not to come inside her college dorm because other parents drive nicer cars. The day she whispered, "Don't speak too loud, Mama. People will think you country." The first Christmas she spent away, choosing to fly with her boyfriend's family instead of coming home. I buried the hurt because mothers do. I told myself it was normal. Children pull away. They want independence. But deep inside, I feared that my sacrifices were not being carried as blessings. They were becoming burdens, reminders of where she came from, reminders she wanted to erase. Even so, I continued to support her. When she called crying from college, I sent money for books. When she broke up with that boyfriend, I drove 4 hours to bring her home. When she landed her first job, I ironed her suits, pressing every wrinkle with pride. I thought those gestures would hold us together. But truth has a way of revealing itself. One Sunday afternoon, maybe 3 years ago, I attended a neighborhood barbecue. Folks gathered around grills, kids ran in circles, music played loud from old speakers. My daughter was there too, smiling with her new friends from the city. When I approached, she turned slightly, just enough so that I would not be in the photos. I saw it. I felt it. A clean cut of exclusion. A neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't you let them make you invisible, Loretta." His words sank deep. That was another moment of truth. Invisibility hurts worse than hunger. So now, sitting alone at my kitchen table with that chipped mug of coffee, I could not escape the memories. Each sacrifice, each humiliation lined up like witnesses in a courtroom I had not yet entered. They told me plainly I had given everything, and now I was being erased. But I also felt something stir inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something steadier. A kind of backbone I didn't know I still carried. I remembered that candlelight night, holding the flame while she wrote. I remembered promising her that darkness doesn't last forever. Those words weren't just for her. They were for me too. The truth is, I had never been too old. I had never been too country. I had never been too small. The only thing too much was the weight of silence I had carried all these years. That night, after leaving her house and returning to my own, I made a decision. I pulled out a notebook and began to write. Every memory, every sacrifice, every insult, every witness. I would build a record, not for revenge, but for truth. Because truth once written becomes stronger than memory, stronger than gossip, stronger than lies. I set the pen down after the first page, my hand aching, but my spirit calm. The mug sat beside me, chipped but unbroken, just like me, and as I turned off the kitchen light, I whispered again, "I will not fight with anger. I will fight with truth." That promise would carry me into battles I could not yet imagine. When I finished writing that first page in my notebook, my hand trembled, but my spirit was steady. I thought that by recording the past, I could keep the truth safe. What I did not realize then was that the future was about to add its own entries, proof that betrayal does not always come as a thunderclap. Sometimes it seeps in like a slow leak, drop by drop, until the floor beneath you is ruined. It began with the small things. A few weeks after that family dinner, my daughter called me not to apologize, but to ask if I could stop mentioning her childhood stories when we were around her colleagues. "Mama, it makes me look unprofessional," she said sharply. I laughed it off, but inside I wondered, since when did a story about walking her to the bus stop become shameful? I told myself it was just pride, just her way of shaping a new identity. But the requests kept coming. Mama, don't come by my office unannounced. Mama, could you wait in the car instead of coming inside? Mama, don't wear that dress to the event, it looks too homemade. Each sentence cut a little deeper. Each request felt like a wall built higher between us. I tried to comply, thinking it would keep the peace. Yet every time I gave in, I felt a part of myself vanish. I began to feel like a ghost hovering at the edge of her life, visible only when convenient. Mini climax came one Sunday morning. She invited me to brunch with her friends at a downtown restaurant. I thought it was a chance to rebuild, to laugh together again. But when the food arrived and the conversation flowed, she introduced me not as her mother but as a relative visiting from out of town. My fork clattered against the plate. I swallowed the bitterness, but I could not swallow the humiliation. I excused myself early, telling her I was tired. That night I added another page to my notebook. Invisible at brunch, I wrote. 3 words that carried the weight of years. As weeks passed, the distance hardened. Phone calls became shorter. Holidays became optional. She began to lean more on her husband, a man polite enough in public but cold in private. I often caught him watching me with narrowed eyes, as if I were a problem he had to manage. I sensed his influence, subtle but steady, in her changing behavior. Then came the photographs. One afternoon, I stopped by unexpectedly carrying a tray of sweet potato pies. Through the window, I saw her living room walls decorated with frames. Pictures of her and her husband at parties, vacations, work events. Not a single one included me. My arms shook as I held the tray. I stood there for a long moment, realizing that I had been erased from the visual story of her life. I placed the pies on the porch, rang the bell, and left without waiting. Mini climax struck again at Christmas. That year she hosted a gathering. I brought gifts wrapped carefully, including a quilt I had stitched by hand. But when it came time to open presents, mine were placed aside, unopened, while others were passed around with laughter. My quilt sat on the corner chair, forgotten. Later I found it still folded, untouched, as if my effort did not exist. That night I went home and wrote in my notebook, the quilt they never opened. By the time spring arrived, my daughter rarely visited me. When she did, her conversations were clipped, her eyes darting to her phone. Once she said, "Mama, you always bring up the past. Can't you just move on?" I wanted to shout that the past was carved into my hands, into the scars of bleach burns, into the calluses from long nights of work. But I stayed silent because I knew shouting would only confirm the picture she was painting of me, an old woman clinging to faded memories. Then around minute 7, in this unfolding betrayal, came the twist that revealed the depth of it all. I received a letter in the mail, not from her, but from a law office. The envelope was crisp, the letterhead heavy. Inside it read, "Petition for Guardianship Review." My breath caught. Guardianship Review. Someone had filed papers questioning my ability to manage my own affairs, and the petitioner's name was my daughter's husband. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, the chipped mug beside me. My heart raced, my mind scrambled. Guardianship meant control. It meant someone else deciding where I lived, how I spent my days, who I trusted. The words blurred, but one line stood out clear. Concerns raised regarding decision-making capacity. Decision-making capacity. They wanted the court to believe I was incompetent. I pressed my palms against the table, trying to steady myself. I thought of the notebook on the counter, pages filled with sacrifices, humiliations, memories no one could erase. I realized then why I had started writing, because truth was my armor. And now I would need it more than ever. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I began to collect. I gathered medical records, receipts, photographs, letters from neighbors who saw me every day capable and strong. I recorded conversations, every word that hinted at their plan. Slowly, carefully, I was building a wall of evidence. Yet even as I gathered proof, the ache inside me grew. This was not just about legal documents. This was my daughter's silence. She hadn't even called me to explain. She had let her husband put my life on paper, reducing me to a case file. That betrayal was heavier than any courtroom battle. Still, I refused to collapse. I remembered the night years ago when I held a candle so my daughter could finish her homework. Back then I told her darkness doesn't last forever. Now I whispered it to myself. I added another entry to the notebook, guardianship papers. The slow betrayal was no longer slow. It was a steady march toward erasure, but I would not vanish. I closed the notebook, placed the chipped mug beside it, and made a vow if they wanted a courtroom, they would get one. But they would also get the truth page by page, witness by witness. This was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a battle I never thought I would fight. And as I turned off the kitchen light that night, I felt it deep in my chest. I would not be erased. Not by papers, not by silence, not even by my own child. The petition for guardianship sat on my kitchen table for days. Every time I passed, my eyes locked on those words, as if they were waiting to swallow me whole. At first, I kept telling myself it was a mistake, that my daughter would call and explain that the whole thing could be undone with one honest conversation. But the call never came. Silence stretched like a knife, cutting deeper with every passing day. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the house twice, rearranged the pantry, even pulled weeds from the yard until my back ached. But every time I paused, my mind snapped back to that paper: guardianship, control, erasure. It followed me into sleep, into the quiet hours of dawn. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. My daughter and her husband invited me formally this time to a family gathering. "Come by," she said on the phone, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "We want to talk things through." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that perhaps my writing, my steady refusal to disappear, had reached her heart. So I went. When I arrived, the house was buzzing. Relatives milled about, laughter rising from the living room. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but as I stepped inside, I felt it again, that tension, like a storm cloud rolling low. My eyes searched for my daughter. She stood near the table, wineglass in hand, her husband beside her like a shadow. I approached, holding my chipped ceramic mug as always. She glanced at it, then at me, and smirked. "Mama," she said loudly enough for others to hear, "you really should get rid of that old thing. It doesn't belong here." Laughter rippled uncomfortably around the room. My throat tightened. This was not reconciliation. This was theater. Mini climax. I steadied myself, raised the mug slightly. "It holds just fine," I said, my voice firm. "Just like me." The room fell quiet. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, or perhaps guilt. But her husband leaned in, whispering words I could not hear. She nodded, then straightened. "Let's sit," she announced. "We have something important to share." We gathered around the dining table. Every seat was filled except one. At the far end again, an empty chair. My chair. I stared at it, my heart pounding. The image cut like glass. Not once, but twice, I had been marked as an outsider in my own bloodline. Her husband began to speak. "We've decided," he said smoothly, "that it's best if someone helps your mother manage things. It's for her own good. Papers have already been filed." Gasps rose from a few relatives. Others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. I gripped the edge of the table, my nails pressing into the wood. "You filed against me without even asking me." My daughter leaned forward. "Mama, it's for the best. You hold on to the past. You cling to old things. You need guidance now." She gestured at the mug still in my hand as if it were proof. Mini climax again. I slammed the mug onto the table, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to echo through the room. "This mug is chipped but not broken, and neither am I." Silence fell. The words hung in the air like smoke. The twist came moments later. One of my cousins seated across from me spoke up. I saw her last week at the library helping children with their homework. She read every word clear as day. "Don't tell me she can't make decisions." Heads turned. Another relative added, "She pays her bills on time. She manages her house better than most of us." The tide began to shift, voices rising in my defense. My daughter's face tightened, her husband's jaw clenched. I felt my spine straighten. For the first time in months, I was not alone. The truth was stepping into the room, carried by witnesses who had seen me live, not by papers drafted in secret. But my daughter pressed on. "Mama, you don't understand. We're only trying to protect you." I met her eyes. "Protect me from what?" "From my own strength. From the truth I've lived every single day." My voice shook, but did not break. Mini climax. The room buzzed, conversations overlapping, tension thick. I stood, refusing to let the empty chair define me. "You can file all the papers you want," I said, my gaze steady. "But I am not invisible. I am not incompetent. And I will not be erased." I walked out before they could answer, my mug in hand. The air outside hit my face like cold water, but it revived me. Each step away from that house felt like reclaiming ground I had lost. That night, back at my kitchen table, I opened the notebook again. I wrote the gathering, the second empty chair, the attempt to erase. My handwriting was firm, my lines straight. Evidence, witnesses, truth. The breaking point was not just about humiliation, it was about clarity. They had shown me their plan in full daylight, and now I knew what I was fighting. I no longer hoped for an apology. I no longer expected warmth. What I expected, what I demanded, was justice. I closed the notebook, placed the chipped mug beside it, and whispered, "Let the paperwork speak." Because in the end I would not win with anger, I would win with truth. And the next battle would not be at a dining table, it would be in a courtroom. The night after the family gathering, I sat at my kitchen table with the notebook open, the chipped mug beside me. My hand shook as I wrote the last words of that day, the second empty chair. The attempt to erase, I underlined it twice. Then I closed the book and placed my palm on its cover as if it were a shield. I knew the fight had changed. No longer was it just about humiliation at a dinner table. It was about survival, about the right to be seen as capable in my own life. They had brought paperwork against me. I would answer with paperwork of my own. The next morning, I began. I walked into my doctor's office as soon as they opened. The nurse looked surprised to see me, but I held my head high. "I need my full medical records," I said firmly. "Every visit, every test, every evaluation." She hesitated at first, but I did not budge. Within an hour, I walked out with a thick folder under my arm, proof that my mind and body were intact. Mini climax. At home, I placed the folder on the table and stared at it. For months I had felt invisible, but now the evidence of my life sat in plain sight. These papers would speak louder than their whispers. The next day, I went to the library. Not for books, but for witnesses. The librarian, a young woman who had seen me countless times tutoring children, greeted me warmly. "Miss James, back again," she said. I nodded. "Would you be willing to write a letter about what you've seen me do here?" Her eyes widened when I explained. Without hesitation, she agreed. By the end of the week, I had a signed statement. "Loretta James volunteers regularly, reads, clearly organizes materials, and supports local students." I slipped the letter into my notebook, sliding it between pages like armor. Then I knocked on neighbors' doors. Mr. Henderson, who had whispered to me once not to let anyone make me invisible, was the first to answer. When I explained, his face darkened with anger. "I've seen you mow your lawn, pay your bills, keep up your home. I'll sign whatever you need." His letter came with strong words. "This woman is capable, reliable, and respected in our neighborhood." Mini climax again. Every new piece of paper added weight, not just to my folder, but to my spirit. I was no longer just a mother clinging to the past. I was a woman building her defense brick by brick. But betrayal does not sleep. One evening, as I sat writing in my notebook, the phone rang. My daughter's voice, smooth but sharp, filled the line. "Mama, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Why can't you just accept help?" I gripped the receiver. "Help is offered, not forced. You filed papers against me without even looking me in the eye," she sighed. "We're only doing what's best." I swallowed hard. Who's best, yours or mine? The silence that followed told me the answer. I hung up before she could twist the words further. I wrote again in my notebook, phone call. Pressure without remorse. The twist arrived a week later. I returned from grocery shopping to find my front door slightly open. Panic shot through me. I rushed inside. Nothing was stolen, but drawers had been shifted. Papers moved. I knew immediately it wasn't a stranger. It was someone looking for documents. My documents. I checked the cabinet where I kept the notebook. The book was still there, but its position was different. I pressed it to my chest, heart hammering. Someone wanted to erase the record I was building. Mini climax. That night, I drove to the office of a lawyer I had once met at a community event. A woman named Miss Carter, sharp-eyed and steady. I handed her the notebook and the growing stack of letters. "Hold this for me," I said. "If they want a fight, I need someone who knows how to use paper as a sword." She nodded without question. For the first time, I felt a flicker of safety. Still, the emotional toll cut deep. Each time I looked at my daughter's face in old photographs, I wondered how the little girl with braids and bright eyes had become the woman who now tried to strip me of my rights. Was it pride? Was it fear? Or was it her husband whispering poison until she believed it? The truth is, I may never know. But what I did know was that love without respect is not love at all. I turned to my community again. At church block parties, at neighborhood meetings, I asked quietly for support. People nodded, offered words, promised to testify if needed. I realized then that while my daughter tried to make me invisible, others still saw me clearly. The chipped mug became my constant companion. Every time I held it, I remembered the words I had spoken, chipped but not broken. It was not just a mug now. It was evidence of endurance, of a spirit that refused to be discarded. Mini climax. Then came the day Ms. Carter called me. "Loretta," she said, "will need everything organized. Medical records, witness letters, proof of financial independence. The judge won't just listen to feelings. He'll listen to paper." I smiled, though my hands trembled. "Then let the paperwork speak." We worked late into the evenings, stacking folders, labeling tabs, preparing exhibits. My kitchen table transformed into a war room, every inch covered in files. Each page I touched felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. But with each victory came a shadow. I knew my daughter would not give up easily. She had already tried twice: first humiliation, then legal petition, then intrusion into my home. The next step would be worse. Still, I did not waver. Because this was not just about me. It was about every woman who had been told she was too old, too weak, too broken to matter. It was about proving that dignity does not expire at 57. One evening, as I closed the notebook after adding another entry, I whispered aloud, "Darkness doesn't last forever." The same words I had once told her when she was a child writing by candlelight. Now they were for me. The proof was in my hands, and soon it would be in the hands of the court. The battle had shifted. The evidence was ready, and the next time we met, it would not be around a dining table. It would be before a judge where truth would stand against lies, and where silence would finally break. The stack of evidence on my kitchen table grew taller with every passing week. Medical records, witness letters, receipts, photographs, all neatly labeled and tucked into folders. Each page felt like a brick, and together they formed the wall I would stand behind when the time came. Still, in the quiet hours of the night, I sensed something darker moving around me, a trap. The first sign appeared in the mail, a certified letter stamped and sealed. I opened it with trembling hands and read, "Notice of Competency Evaluation." My daughter and her husband had filed for a court-ordered psychological assessment. Their claim was simple but brutal, that I was no longer able to make rational decisions. Mini climax. The words hit like a blow to the chest. Competency. As if decades of sacrifice of raising a child on my own could be erased with one line on legal stationery. My breath came fast, and for a moment I gripped the edge of the counter just to steady myself. I called Miss Carter immediately. "They're trying to have me declared incompetent," I said, my voice shaking. She stayed calm. "It's a common tactic," she explained. "They hope to scare you, to make you slip up, to create an image of weakness. But remember, truth is on your side. We'll prepare." I closed my eyes and held the chipped mug in both hands. Chipped but not broken. At peace at last. Neither was I. The evaluation took place in a small office downtown. A man in a gray suit introduced himself as Dr. Phillips. His voice was smooth, his smile practiced. He asked me to sit at a polished wooden table. My daughter and her husband sat outside waiting. I could feel their presence even through the door, like vultures circling. Dr. Phillips began with simple questions: my name, my address, today's date. I answered clearly, calmly. Then he moved to memory tests. "Repeat these numbers backward," he instructed. "List as many animals as you can in 1 minute." I did as he asked, my heart pounding with every word. Mini climax. When the test ended, he leaned back, pen tapping against the clipboard. "You did well," he admitted, though his tone was cautious. "But I will need to review everything before writing my report." I left the office feeling both relieved and unsettled. Relieved because I had held my ground. Unsettled because I knew that a single sentence in his report could change everything. Days later, another blow came. Ms. Carter called with urgency in her voice. "Loretta, we discovered something. Your daughter's husband submitted documents claiming you mishandled your bank account. They're alleging financial mismanagement." My stomach dropped. "That's a lie. I keep records of every payment, every bill." "Exactly," Ms. Carter said. "Which is why we need those records organized and notarized. Lies travel fast, but paperwork stands longer." Mini climax. I spent the next 3 nights combing through drawers, pulling out check stubs, bank statements, and receipts. My kitchen table disappeared beneath piles of paper, but slowly order emerged. I placed every document in protective sleeves, labeling them month by month. When I finished, I looked at the folders and felt a surge of strength. They had set a trap, but I had built a ladder. Then came the twist, sharp and cutting. A neighbor stopped me one afternoon, concern etched on her face. "Loretta, I saw your daughter and her husband leaving the courthouse. They were smiling. People said they already have a letter from a doctor declaring you unfit." My heart froze. I knew instantly what had happened. A second doctor, someone chosen by them, had written a biased report. 2 reports would now collide in court, one neutral, one poisoned. I hurried to Ms. Carter's office, my chest tight. She listened carefully, then leaned forward. "This is exactly why we need every shred of evidence. A biased report can be dismantled, but only with proof. Witnesses, records, your own evaluation from an independent expert." She handed me a referral to Dr. Moore, a respected physician known for fairness. "If you pass his evaluation, the judge will see the difference." Mini climax. I met Dr. Moore the following week. His office was modest, his demeanor straightforward. He asked not just about memory, but about daily life. "Do you cook your own meals? Do you manage your bills? Do you drive?" I answered each question firmly, adding details. He asked me to recall names of presidents, to draw a clock, to interpret a short story. I completed each task with care. When it ended, Dr. Moore smiled gently. "Loretta, you are fully competent. My report will reflect that." Relief washed over me, hot and sharp. Another brick added to my wall of defense. But the legal trap was closing in tighter. Court notices began to arrive, thick with dates and demands. Pre-hearing conferences, deadlines for submissions, warnings about testimony. My daughter's husband had filed motion after motion, hoping to bury me in confusion. Each envelope felt like a stone dropped on my back. One evening, as I spread the papers across my table, I whispered to myself, "They want to drown me in paperwork, but they forget I know how to swim." I kept building. Witness letters multiplied. Financial records thickened. Ms. Carter organized everything into binders, color-coded and tabbed. My notebook, once just a private record, now sat in the center like a cornerstone. Every page bore witness, mini climax. Emotionally, the weight was crushing. I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, asking myself how my own child could watch this unfold. Did she believe the lies, or had she chosen convenience over truth? Either way, the trap was clear: humiliate me, declare me unfit, seize control. But I was no longer walking blind. I saw every step of the net they tried to throw over me, and I had chosen my weapon: evidence. The chipped mug rested beside me as I reviewed documents late into the night. I touched its worn edge, whispering, "Chipped, but not broken." The words steadied me. I knew the day would come when I would stand in court, my daughter across from me, her husband smirking with confidence. But I also knew their trap would collapse under the weight of truth. For now, my task was simple: build, organize, prepare. Because when the judge looked at me, he would not see a broken woman. He would see a mother who refused to vanish, a woman who fought not with anger, but with proof. And when the paperwork spoke, it would speak louder than any lie. The weight of the binders on my kitchen table was heavy, but the silence in my house was heavier. Every night I worked late, labeling, sorting, preparing. Yet I knew that paper alone would not be enough. Judges might respect documents, but juries of the heart, neighbors, friends of the community, spoke in voices louder than ink. I needed more than folders. I needed people. It began at the corner store. Mrs. Langston, a woman from down the block, stopped me as I carried a bag of groceries. "Loretta," she said softly, "I heard rumors. Folks are saying your daughter's trying to take control." Her eyes brimmed with sorrow. Mini climax. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That's true. They filed papers. They want the court to believe I can't live my own life." She gripped my arm, firm and steady. "I've seen you walk to the store every week. I've seen you balance your checkbook at the counter. Don't you worry, I'll tell them myself." Her words lit something inside me. For so long I had felt cornered, but now a door cracked open. My community had been watching, not with judgment, but with quiet faith. The next Sunday, I went to the community center where block meetings were held. Folding chairs lined the room, the smell of coffee lingering in the air. When it was my turn to speak, I stood notebook in hand. My voice trembled at first but steadied. My daughter says I'm unfit. She filed papers to prove it. But many of you have seen me live day by day. If you are willing, I need your voices. For a moment, silence. Then Mr. Henderson rose from his seat. His cane tapped the floor, but his voice carried like thunder. I've known Loretta for 30 years. She cuts her own grass, pays her bills, and helps my grandchildren with homework. If anyone says she's incompetent, they're blind or lying. Applause broke out sharp and sudden. Mini climax. Others followed. A young mother stood cradling her baby. Ms. James watched my son last summer when I had to work late. She cooked for him, kept him safe. She's more capable than half of us. An older neighbor added, she organized our block party last year. If she can't make decisions, then none of us can. Each testimony felt like water poured on parched soil. For months I had been painted as fragile, but here in the voices of people who knew me, I was whole again. Still doubt crept in. Later that night, as I sat alone, I wondered if these words would carry weight in court. Judges respected notarized statements, not clapping hands in a meeting room. But Ms. Carter assured me otherwise when I told her. Witnesses matter, she said. People who've seen your daily life can cut through lies. Bring them forward. So I did. We gathered at my home one evening. The chipped mug sat in the center of the table like an anchor. Around me sat neighbors' friends, even the librarian who had written her letter. One by one, they offered to testify. I'll come, Mrs. Langston said. I'll stand before the judge. Mr. Henderson nodded. They won't silence me. Mini climax. Tears pricked my eyes. For so long, I had believed I was standing alone against a storm. Now I realized I was part of something larger. My fight was not just mine. It was theirs too. But betrayal lingered near. The twist arrived when I received another phone call from my daughter. Her tone was cold-clipped. Mama, why are you dragging the neighbors into this? This is family business. I held the phone tight. Family business became public the moment you filed in court. I will not face this battle in silence. Her anger spilled through the line. You're embarrassing us. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. Respect is the rent you pay for love. And you stopped paying long ago. Mini climax. The silence that followed was heavier than words. Then she hung up. I wrote the exchange into my notebook, the pages thick now with entries. Each one a stone, each one a shield. The following week, Miss Carter arranged a meeting at her office. My witnesses filed in, filling the room until chairs were scarce. She smiled as she looked around. This, she said, is what truth looks like. Paper is strong, but people are stronger. We spent hours preparing. Each neighbor recounted specific events, me shoveling snow, paying utilities, tutoring children, attending community meetings. Ms. Carter recorded every detail, shaping them into testimony. By the end of the night, the room buzzed with determination. I felt it in my bones. The trap they had set for me was cracking. Not because of my anger, but because of the voices rising around me. Still, I knew the hardest part lay ahead. The courtroom, the judge, the moment when my daughter's words would stand against mine. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone again at my kitchen table. The chipped mug was warm with coffee, the notebook thick with entries. I whispered to myself, "You are not invisible. Not to them, not to me. Not anymore." Mini climax. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene to come, the courtroom silent. My daughter confident, her husband smug. And then behind me, the rows of neighbors ready to stand, ready to speak. It would not erase the pain. It would not erase the betrayal. But it would carry me forward. The community had become my witness. And in the battle between lies and truth, their voices would echo louder than the silence my daughter tried to impose. The next step was clear. The courtroom was waiting, and I was ready. The morning of the hearing arrived heavy with silence. I dressed carefully, choosing a plain navy dress, the same one I had worn to graduations and funerals. My chipped mug sat on the counter, filled with coffee steam curling upward. I held it for a moment, letting the warmth settle in my hands. Chipped but not broken. Neither was I. At the courthouse steps, the air felt colder than it should have. People streamed past, some strangers, some neighbors, who nodded at me with quiet encouragement. Behind me, I heard the steady tap of Mr. Henderson's cane and the soft murmur of Mrs. Langston. My community had come just as they promised. Their presence wrapped around me like a cloak. Mini climax. Inside the courtroom was stark and unforgiving. Wooden benches, high ceilings. A judge's bench towering above us all. I took my seat beside Miss Carter, folders stacked neatly on the table. Across from me sat my daughter and her husband, polished and confident, their lawyer whispering between them. My daughter's eyes slid past me without recognition. The judge entered, robes, flowing gavel striking wood. Court is now in session. The proceedings began with their lawyer. He painted a picture of me as a fragile woman clinging to the past, unable to manage her affairs. His words were smooth, rehearsed. "We only seek what is best for her," he said. "Protection, guidance, oversight." My chest tightened, but I sat still. My hands folded over the chipped mug, resting quietly in my lap. Then it was Ms. Carter's turn. She rose with calm authority. "Your Honor," she said, "today you will hear not just claims, but truth. You will see documents, records, and living witnesses who can attest to Loretta James's capability." Mini climax. The first witness called was the librarian. She stepped forward, voice steady. "I see Ms. James at the library nearly every week. She volunteers, she tutors, she organizes. She reads to children, clearly remembers details, and supports our programs. She is not incompetent. She is a pillar." The judge nodded, taking notes. My daughter shifted in her seat, her jaw tight. Next came Mr. Henderson. He leaned on his cane but spoke like thunder. "Loretta pays her bills, mows her lawn, and helped raise half the kids on our block. If she's incompetent, then I must be dead." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, even from the judge. Mini climax. One by one, the community stepped up. Mrs. Langston described seeing me manage finances. A young mother recounted how I watched her child safely. Each testimony stacked higher, a wall of voices rising against the lies. But then came the twist. Their lawyer stood again, holding up a sheet of paper. "Your Honor, we submit into evidence a medical report from Dr. Phillips concluding that Miss James demonstrates signs of cognitive decline. This is professional opinion." Gasps filled the room. My stomach dropped. The biased report had found its way into the heart of the hearing. The judge scanned the page, brows furrowed. For a moment, silence pressed heavy. Then Miss Carter rose swiftly. "Your Honor, we have an independent evaluation from Dr. Moore, whose reputation is beyond reproach. His report concludes the opposite, that Miss James is fully competent." "May I submit it?" She handed over the document. The judge read carefully, then looked up at me. "Miss James, do you wish to speak?" Mini climax. I rose slowly, gripping the chipped mug in both hands. My voice trembled at first, but grew steady. "Your Honor, I am 57 years old. I have worked all my life. I raised my daughter alone. I balanced 2 jobs, paid every bill, and kept my home. I am chipped, yes. Life has chipped me. But I am not broken, and I will not be erased." Silence. The courtroom fell silent. Even the lawyer lowered his eyes. Then from the back of the room, a voice called out. It was the young boy I once tutored at the library. He stood on the bench, his small voice carrying, "She helped me read. She's not broken." The bailiff moved to hush him, but the damage was done. The truth had spilled into the open. Mini climax. The judge leaned back, studying me. He turned to my daughter. "Do you have anything to add?" She hesitated, her face pale. Her husband nudged her arm, but she shook him off. For the first time in years, she looked directly at me. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The judge cleared his throat. "This court will review all evidence, but let me be clear, guardianship is not a tool for control. It is a measure of last resort. Based on what I have heard today, I see a woman who is competent, supported, and determined. This petition is on shaky ground." The room stopped breathing. Relief surged through me, hot and sharp. The trap they had set was cracking. The gavel struck. Court is adjourned until the final ruling. Evidence will be weighed, but Ms. James, you have shown remarkable clarity today. Mini climax. As people filed out, neighbors touched my shoulder, whispered encouragement. Ms. Carter squeezed my hand. "You did it. You turned the tide." I walked outside into the sunlight, clutching the chipped mug. The air felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted. For months I had been silenced, cornered, painted as invisible. But in that courtroom, with witnesses at my side, the silence had broken. It was not the final victory. The legal battle was not over. But the revelation had come, the truth was visible, undeniable, and mine to claim. I whispered to myself, let the paperwork speak. And it had. The morning after the hearing, I woke to sunlight streaming across my kitchen table. The binders of evidence still sat there thick and orderly, but now they seemed lighter as if the weight had shifted. For months those folders had been my shield. Now they felt like weapons that had already struck. I poured coffee into my chipped mug, held it close, and whispered, "We are still here." Mini climax. Word of the hearing spread quickly through the neighborhood. At the corner store, people stopped me to offer smiles and nods. "We heard you spoke strong," one man said. At church, though I hadn't asked for it, a group prayed not for me to win, but for truth to prevail. Even children at the library waved when I walked in, whispering, "She's the one who helped me read." Their voices were small, but together they felt louder than any gavel. But for my daughter and her husband, the consequences came swiftly. Their polished confidence began to crack. At the next family gathering, one I did not attend, I heard whispers traveled back to me. Relatives confronted them, asking how they could betray their own blood. Some turned their backs. Others refused their invitations. The silence they once forced on me was now surrounding them. Mini climax. At work, too, word leaked out. My daughter had built a reputation on ambition, but colleagues began to whisper about the court case. A woman who tried to strip her own mother of rights did not look like a leader. I did not rejoice in that knowledge, but I recognized it as justice unfolding in its own way. Her husband fared worse. He had filed the motions, stirred the lies, and now his name was tied to a failed petition. Friends at his firm distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the man who tried to erase a woman still standing strong. Yet justice is rarely clean. The twist arrived on a Thursday evening. A knock came at my door. When I opened it, my daughter stood there, eyes red, shoulders slumped. For the first time in years, she looked less like the woman who towered above me and more like the girl who once clung to my skirt. "Mama," she said softly, "we lost friends. People look at us different now." I held the doorframe, my heart tight. "You chose lies, and lies always collect their rent." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting you, by silencing me, by filing papers behind my back. Protection without respect is not protection. It is control." Mini climax. She looked away, shame etched across her face. "I don't know how to fix it." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Start by admitting the truth to yourself, to the family, to the court." "Not for me, for you." She nodded, but whether she would follow through, I did not yet know. After she left, I sat again at the kitchen table, opened my notebook, and wrote, "Daughter came to the door. Words of regret. No apology yet." The page was not closure, but it was proof that the tide had shifted. The following week, Miss Carter called. "The judge has issued a preliminary order. He dismissed the guardianship petition. Final ruling will confirm it, but for now, you remain fully independent." Relief surged through me. I pressed the phone to my ear, eyes closed, whispering, "Thank you." Mini climax. The consequences rippled further than I expected. Neighbors organized a small gathering in my honor. They brought food, laughter, and music. It was not a victory parade, but a celebration of resilience. Someone raised a toast to Loretta, chipped, but not broken. The words lifted me higher than any legal paper could. Still, my heart ached when I thought of my daughter. She had not attended. Pride, or perhaps shame, kept her away. I could not control that. Healing, I realized, was not a demand, it was a choice. The true consequence was not her isolation or her husband's disgrace. It was my clarity. For the first time in years, I no longer felt invisible. My life was not defined by their paperwork. It was defined by my own voice, my own actions, my own community. Mini climax. One night I sat alone, the chipped mug warm in my hands, the notebook open before me. I flipped through the pages, every humiliation, every betrayal, every witness, every truth. What once felt like wounds now looked like evidence of survival. I realized then this book was not just my defense. It was my story. The battle in court had not destroyed me. It had revealed me. As the days passed, I saw the slow unraveling of the trap they had set. My daughter and her husband, once so certain, now walked in shadows of their own making. I walked lighter, not because I had defeated them, but because I had defended myself without losing who I was. The chipped mug sat steady on the table. I touched its worn edge and whispered, "Let the paperwork speak." And it had. The consequence of their betrayal was not just their loss, it was my awakening. And as I turned off the kitchen light that night, I felt a truth settle deep within me. No one, not even my own child, would ever erase me again. The weeks after the hearing felt like the slow return of spring after a brutal winter. My kitchen, once crowded with binders and folders, grew clear again. I placed the notebook back on its shelf, not as evidence waiting to be used, but as a record of survival. The chipped mug still sat on the table every morning, warm with coffee steady in my hands. It had become more than a symbol. It was a promise, chipped, yes, but never broken. Mini climax. The judge's final ruling arrived in the mail 2 weeks later. I opened the envelope with steady fingers. Petition for guardianship is denied. The words were plain simple, without ceremony, but they glowed like sunlight on the page. My independence was intact. My life was mine again. I set the letter on the table, placed the chipped mug beside it, and whispered, "The paperwork spoke." And it spoke the truth. The community celebrated quietly with me. Neighbors brought food, laughter, and hugs. At the library, the children ran up to me, tugging at my sleeves. "You're still our teacher," one said. At the store, Mr. Henderson lifted his cane like a salute. Justice served. Their faith in me had never wavered, and now I could finally see myself the way they saw me. But the hardest part of healing was not the court. It was my daughter. Mini climax. She kept her distance for a while, avoiding calls and visits. But one Sunday afternoon, she appeared again at my door. Her shoulders drooped, her voice soft. "Mama, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me." I studied her face, the lines of stress, the regret etched deep. For years I had carried her as my pride, my reason. For months I had carried her as my wound. Now I saw her as she truly was, a woman still learning, still stumbling, still mine. "Forgiveness," I said slowly, "isn't a gift you demand. It's a choice I make. And I am not ready yet, but I am willing to try." Tears welled in her eyes. She stepped forward, hesitated, then wrapped her arms around me. For a moment I let her hold on. The hurt was still there, but so was the memory of the little girl who once clung to my hand at the bus stop. Mini climax. That night I wrote in the notebook for the final time. Healing has begun. Forgiveness is not finished, but the door is open. I closed the book and set it gently on the shelf where it belonged. Not as a shield anymore, but as a chapter closed. Life slowly returned to its rhythm. I worked at the library more often, helping children discover the joy of reading. I walked the neighborhood, greeted friends, and planted flowers in the small patch of soil by my porch. Each bloom felt like proof that broken things can still grow. One morning, as I sipped from the chipped mug, sunlight spilling through the window, I realized something. The fight had never just been about legal papers. It had been about voice, about refusing to disappear, about telling the world, "I'm here, I matter, I endure." Mini climax. The consequences for my daughter and her husband: continued strained relationships, lost respect. But those were their burdens to carry. My burden had lifted. Healing did not mean forgetting what they had done. It meant choosing not to let it define me. The twist came quietly. A letter arrived in the mail, not from court, but from my daughter. It was short, written in her careful handwriting. "Mama, I am sorry. Not for what people think. For what I made you feel. I see now. I hope one day you can see me differently too." I held the letter for a long time, tears slipping down my cheeks. It was not everything, but it was something. A crack of light. Healing often begins in fragments. Mini climax. I placed the letter inside the notebook, between the pages filled with pain. Now it lived among the records of betrayal, but it was also the seed of something new. On the porch that evening, I sat with neighbors, sipping sweet tea. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Mr. Henderson leaned over. "Loretta," he said, "you taught all of us something. That dignity doesn't come from what others say. It comes from how you stand when they try to push you down." I smiled, feeling the truth settle deep. Healing, I realized, is not a destination. It is a practice. Each day I chose to drink from the chipped mug. Each day I chose to write no more in the notebook, to let the past rest. Each day I chose to see myself not as erased, but as whole. Mini climax. The court battle had ended, but the real victory was quieter. A community united a mother who refused to vanish, a woman who found her voice again. As the last light faded, I whispered, chipped but not broken. The words no longer felt like defiance. They felt like peace. The healing was not perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that was enough. I know I'm not the only one. Many of us, especially as Black mothers, have been told we're too loud, too old, or just not enough. But dignity has no expiration date. Family should mean respect. I shared my truth today because I believe stories like mine matter. Now I want to hear from you. If your own child tried to erase your voice, what would you do? Would you fight back or would you forgive? Share your heart in the comments. I read every word. And if this story touched you, please subscribe, because we've got more voices, more truths, and more healing to share together.